The evening sun cast long shadows across the dusty main street of Brimstone Creek as Nathaniel Hayes tied his chestnut mare to the hitching post outside the Broken Spoke Saloon. His weathered face, lined with 48 years of hard living on the frontier, betrayed little emotion as he adjusted the Colt revolver at his hip and surveyed the quiet town. 3 weeks on the trail had left him bone-weary, his clothes stiff with dust and sweat, and his throat parched for something stronger than the tepid water in his canteen. The last cattle drive to Wichita had netted him enough to afford a few nights of comfort before heading back to his small ranch near the Arizona Territory border. What he didn't know as he pushed through the bat-wing doors was that his reputation had preceded him. And not everyone in Brimstone Creek was pleased about Nathaniel Hayes arriving in their town. If you're watching this video, I'd appreciate it if you'd subscribe to the channel. I'm curious, what city are you watching from? The Broken Spoke hummed with the usual frontier symphony, the tinny notes from a piano in the corner, the clink of glasses, low murmurs punctuated by occasional bursts of laughter, and the distinctive shuffle of cards across felt tables. Nathaniel made his way to the bar, his spurs jingling with each deliberate step, drawing fleeting glances from the patrons, some curious, others wary. "Whiskey," he said to the barkeep, a corpulent man with a magnificent handlebar mustache. "The good stuff, if you have it." The bartender, who introduced himself as Mitch, nodded and reached for a bottle from the higher shelf. "You passing through or staying a while, mister?" Mitch asked, pouring 2 fingers of amber liquid. Nathaniel downed half the glass in one swallow, savoring the burn. "Depends on what Brimstone Creek has to offer a tired man," he replied, scanning the room over the rim of his glass. At a corner table, partially obscured by tobacco smoke, sat 2 women whose appearance immediately set them apart from the town's other denizens. They were Apache, dressed in a curious blend of traditional and white settlers' clothing. The older one, perhaps in her late 20s, wore her hair in 2 long braids adorned with small silver ornaments that caught the lamplight when she moved. The younger, barely out of her teens, had eyes that gleamed with intelligence and something else Nathaniel couldn't quite define. Perhaps mischief, perhaps danger. Both women were watching him with undisguised interest. When they caught his gaze, the younger one smiled and whispered something to her companion, who nodded slowly, her expression unreadable. Nathaniel turned back to his drink, but not before noticing how the local patrons gave the women a wide berth. Despite the saloon being relatively crowded, "I wouldn't get too friendly with the Red Hawk sisters if I were you," Mitch said quietly, following Nathaniel's gaze. "Victoria and Elena, half-breed daughters of an Apache woman and some cavalry officer who deserted his post 20 years ago. They live outside town, keep to themselves mostly. Got a small horse ranch in the foothills." The barkeep leaned closer, lowering his voice further. "Some say they practice the old ways, know things they shouldn't. Others say they're just trying to make their way like anybody else. Either way, most folks in Brimstone give them a wide berth." Nathaniel nodded, filing the information away without comment. He'd learned long ago that frontier towns were rife with superstition and prejudice, and he preferred to form his own judgments about people. Still, something about the sisters, the way they carried themselves with quiet confidence in a room full of people who clearly distrusted them, piqued his curiosity. As the evening progressed, Nathaniel secured a room upstairs, ate a passable meal of beef stew and cornbread, and found himself in a poker game with 3 local ranchers and a traveling salesman peddling patent medicines. He played conservatively, winning small pots and losing others, all the while aware of the Red Hawk sisters' occasional glances from their corner table. Around midnight, the game broke up when one of the ranchers lost his monthly profits and stormed out. The salesman, having consumed too much of Mitch's rot-gut whiskey, was slumped in his chair, snoring softly. Nathaniel collected his modest winnings and was contemplating turning in when Victoria Redhawk materialized at his elbow, moving with such silent grace that he, despite years of honed frontier instincts, hadn't heard her approach. "Mr. Hayes," she said, her voice low and melodic, with just a hint of an accent. "My sister and I would like to speak with you, privately." Nathaniel's hand instinctively moved closer to his revolver. "You have me at a disadvantage, ma'am. You know my name, but we haven't been properly introduced." Victoria's expression remained impassive. "Your reputation rides ahead of you, Mr. Hayes. The man who tracked down the Stillwell gang after they murdered your wife and son. The former Army scout who can read sign better than most Apache. The rancher who refuses to join the cattle barons in driving smaller operations and Indians off their land." She paused, dark eyes studying his face. "We have a proposition that might interest you, one that could prove mutually beneficial." Nathaniel considered the woman before him. In his experience, propositions in frontier towns often led to trouble. But trouble had been his constant companion for years now, and curiosity was one of the few pleasures he still allowed himself. "Lead the way, Miss Redhawk," he said, rising from his chair. "But know that I'm selective about the company I keep and the jobs I take." The night air had cooled considerably as they exited the saloon, the younger sister, Elena, joining them on the boardwalk. The main street was deserted now, the only sounds the distant howl of a coyote and the faint piano music spilling from the broken spokes' open windows. "We have a small place about 2 miles outside of town," Elena said, speaking for the first time. Her voice was higher than her sister's, but with the same musical quality. "Our horses are at the livery. We can fetch them and be there in less than an hour." Nathaniel hesitated, years of caution warring with his interest. "Perhaps we should discuss this proposition here in town, ladies, tomorrow, in daylight." Victoria shook her head firmly. "What we have to show you cannot be brought into town, Mr. Hayes, and time is not our ally in this matter." There was an urgency in her tone that seemed genuine, but Nathaniel had been deceived by better liars than these two young women. "At least tell me what this is about before I agree to ride out to a remote location with strangers in the middle of the night." The sisters exchanged a glance laden with unspoken communication. Finally, Elena spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "We found something on our land, something that belongs to a man named Colonel William Blackwood." At the name, Nathaniel felt a jolt of recognition, followed by a surge of cold anger. William Blackwood had been a Confederate officer during the war, who'd turned to banditry afterward. More importantly to Nathaniel, Blackwood had been riding with the Stillwell gang the day they attacked his homestead in Texas, killing Sarah and young Thomas while Nathaniel was away. Blackwood was one of 2 men who had escaped Nathaniel's methodical vengeance in the years since. "You have my attention," Nathaniel said, his voice hardening. Victoria nodded, seeming to note the change in his demeanor. "Then you'll come with us." Nathaniel glanced up and down the empty street, considering. His instincts were sending mixed signals, warning of potential danger, but also urging him to follow this unexpected lead. "I'll get my horse," he said finally. "But understand this, I'm not a man to be trifled with." The ride through the moonlit desert was conducted mostly in silence. Victoria took the lead, with Elena and Nathaniel riding side by side behind her. The younger Redhawk sister occasionally glanced at him with obvious curiosity, but seemed to respect his taciturn mood. The terrain gradually changed from flat desert to rolling foothills dotted with scrub oak and juniper. After about 40 minutes of steady riding, they crested a small rise, and Nathaniel saw their destination, a modest adobe and wood frame house nestled against a hillside, with several small outbuildings and a corral containing a dozen horses. As they approached, Nathaniel noted the neat garden plot, the well-maintained barn, and the generally prosperous appearance of the small ranch. These women might be outcasts in town, but they were clearly skilled and hard-working. It wasn't what he had expected, though he wasn't entirely sure what he had been anticipating. "You have a fine place here," Nathaniel commented as they dismounted in front of the house. Elena flashed a brief smile. "Our mother taught us that survival means adapting. We raise horses, mainly. Sell them to the army when they're not too busy harassing Apache bands." There was a bitter edge to her voice that Nathaniel understood all too well. The sisters led him to the barn, where Victoria lit a lantern and hung it from a hook. The interior was clean and well organized, with stalls for 4 horses, a tack room, and a hayloft above. "Up there," Victoria said, pointing to the loft. "After we show you, we'll explain how it came to be in our possession." Nathaniel followed them up the ladder, his hand never straying far from his Colt. The loft was half filled with sweet-smelling hay, and in the far corner, partially covered by a tarpaulin, was a large wooden chest. Victoria pulled back the tarp, revealing an officer's trunk with the initials WB burned into the lid. She knelt and opened it, and by the lantern light, Nathaniel saw the contents: stacks of banknotes, several small cloth bags that presumably contained coins or gold dust, and a leather portfolio. "2 nights ago, 3 men arrived after midnight," Elena explained, her voice low despite the isolation of their ranch. "They were injured, one severely. They asked for shelter and medical attention, which we provided." Victoria picked up the narrative. "The badly wounded man was delirious with fever. He died before morning, despite our efforts. Before he passed, he spoke of Colonel Blackwood, a payroll robbery in Tucson, and a meeting point at Coyote Canyon. The other 2 men left at dawn with their companion's body, but in their haste, they forgot this chest hidden in our hayloft." Nathaniel examined the contents of the trunk without touching anything. The portfolio contained maps, including one with Coyote Canyon clearly marked, about 40 miles southwest of their current location. There were also documents that appeared to be Army payroll records and a wanted poster for the Blackwood gang. "The money is from a robbery," he said. "It wasn't a question." 5 men killed during that raid, Victoria confirmed, including 2 Apache scouts working for the Army. She met his eyes steadily. "We have no love for the white man's government, Mr. Hayes, but neither do we condone murder or align ourselves with men like Blackwood. We know your history with him. We've heard the stories. That's why we sought you out." Nathaniel closed the trunk lid slowly. "What exactly are you proposing, Miss Redhawk?" Elena answered, her youthful face suddenly hard with determination. "Justice, Mr. Hayes. We want you to use this to find Blackwood and his men and end their depredations once and for all." The following morning found Nathaniel seated at the Redhawk's kitchen table, studying the maps from Blackwood's trunk, while Victoria cooked a breakfast of corn cakes and venison strips. Elena was outside, tending to the horses and keeping watch, though they'd seen no signs of Blackwood's men returning. "The meeting at Coyote Canyon is scheduled for 3 days from now," Nathaniel observed, tracing the route with his finger. "Blackwood and his remaining men plan to rendezvous with the advance party who left the trunk here, then cross into Mexico with the stolen payroll. Victoria placed a steaming mug of coffee before him. The question is whether they'll still go through with their plan, now that they've lost both a man and most of their stolen money. Nathaniel took a sip of the strong, bitter coffee. Men like Blackwood don't abandon plans easily, especially when they involve a significant payoff. My guess is we'll proceed, but with caution. And what do you intend to do? Victoria asked, sitting across from him. In the morning light, he could better appreciate the fine lines of her face, the intelligence in her dark eyes. Despite her obvious strength, there was a vulnerability there too, a wariness born of living between two worlds and belonging fully to neither. I've been hunting Blackwood for 6 years, Nathaniel replied honestly. He was there when my family was murdered. He and Jack Stillwell were the only ones who escaped my retribution. He paused, meeting her steady gaze. I intend to finish what I started. Blackwood deserves a reckoning for what he's done, not just to my family, but to countless others. The money will be returned to the army, of course. Victoria nodded, seemingly satisfied with his answer. And what of us? We harbored his men, albeit unknowingly. We've concealed stolen government money. Nathaniel considered her question. The Red Hawk sisters were in a precarious position, regardless of their intentions. In the eyes of many, their mixed heritage made them inherently suspect. You contacted me of your own free will. You're returning stolen property through me. As far as I'm concerned, you did your Christian duty by tending to injured men, and your civic duty by reporting the crime once you discovered it. He paused, sipping his coffee. But it might be prudent for you to be elsewhere when I confront Blackwood. If things go sideways, you don't want to be associated with this affair. Victoria's expression hardened slightly. We're not helpless women needing protection, Mr. Hayes. We can handle ourselves in a fight, should it come to that. Nathaniel allowed himself a small smile. I never suggested otherwise, Miss Redhawk. But this is my fight, not yours. You've already done more than most would. Their conversation was interrupted by Elena's entrance, her expression tense. Riders coming, she announced, moving to a cabinet from which she retrieved a Winchester rifle. 3 men, moving fast. Victoria was on her feet instantly, reaching for her own weapon, an army Colt similar to Nathaniel's. Could be Blackwood's men returning for the trunk, Nathaniel said, rising and checking his revolver. Or it could be unrelated, Victoria suggested, though her tone indicated she didn't believe it. Either way, we should prepare for trouble. Nathaniel nodded, moving to the window to assess the approaching riders. They were still distant, but closing rapidly. 3 men on horseback, pushing their mounts hard. Even at this distance, something about their riding style struck him as familiar. Those aren't Blackwood's men, he said slowly, recognition dawning. That's Sheriff Marcus Taylor from Brimstone Creek, and unless I'm mistaken, those are deputized men with him. Victoria's expression darkened. Sheriff Taylor has no jurisdiction out here, and he knows it. This is territorial land, not county. Elena joined them at the window, rifle at the ready. Taylor has had it in for us since we refused to sell our water rights to his brother-in-law last year. This isn't the first time he's ridden out here to harass us. Nathaniel considered this new complication. A corrupt sheriff was the last thing they needed with Blackwood's blood money sitting in their barn. Let me handle this, he said, decision made. Hide the trunk for now. If Taylor's looking to cause trouble, having an outsider present might make him think twice. The sisters exchanged a glance. Then Victoria nodded curtly. Very well, Mr. Hayes, but understand that we're not strangers to Sheriff Taylor's particular brand of frontier justice. This won't be the first time we've stood our ground against him. Sheriff Marcus Taylor was a tall, gaunt man with cold eyes and a perpetual sneer that seemed carved into his features. He reined his horse to a stop in the yard. His two companions, younger men with the mean, hungry look of coyotes, flanking him. All three had their hands hovering near their sidearms. "Well, well," Taylor drawled, his gaze shifting from the Red Hawk sisters to Nathaniel. "What have we here?" The infamous Nathaniel Hayes, paying a social call on our local Apache witches? This is an unexpected development. Nathaniel stepped forward, placing himself subtly between the lawman and the sisters. "Sheriff Taylor," he acknowledged with a slight nod, "I wasn't aware my personal business was of interest to the law in Brimstone Creek." Taylor's thin lips twisted into something resembling a smile. "Everything that happens in and around my town is my business, Hayes, especially when it involves known troublemakers and a man with your reputation." "We've broken no laws, Sheriff," Victoria said coolly, her Winchester held casually but clearly visible. "And as you've been reminded numerous times, our ranch lies outside your jurisdiction." Taylor spat a stream of tobacco juice onto the dusty ground. "That may be so under normal circumstances, Miss Red Hawk, but I've received information that suggests you might be harboring stolen property, specifically money from the Army payroll robbery in Tucson." Nathaniel felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. Someone had talked, perhaps one of Blackwood's injured men, or a spy in Brimstone Creek who had overheard their conversation with the Red Hawk sisters. Either way, this complicated matters significantly. Taylor continued, his voice taking on an official tone. "I'm here to search these premises for stolen government property. Any interference will be considered obstruction of justice." Elena stepped forward, her young face flushed with anger. "You have no authority here, Taylor. No jurisdiction, no warrant. This is nothing but harassment, and you know it." The sheriff's expression hardened, and he dismounted, followed by his deputies. "I don't need a warrant when I have probable cause, girl." And harboring a known gunman like Hayes while concealing stolen money is more than enough cause in my book. He nodded to his deputies. "Search the house and outbuildings. Be thorough." Nathaniel's mind raced, calculating options. If Taylor found the trunk, the Red Hawk sisters would face serious charges, regardless of their innocence. Even if they escaped legal punishment, their reputation and livelihood would be destroyed. And Nathaniel would lose his best chance at finally bringing Blackwood to justice. He needed to buy time, redirect Taylor's attention, or somehow prevent the search altogether. "Sheriff," Nathaniel said, his voice calm, despite the tension coiling within him, "you're operating on bad information. I arrived in Brimstone Creek just yesterday, looking for trail work. The Red Hawk sisters were kind enough to offer me a meal and a place to rest my horse. Nothing more." Taylor's cold eyes narrowed. "Is that so? Then you won't mind if my deputies take a look around, will you?" Before Nathaniel could respond, Victoria spoke up. "Actually, Sheriff, we do mind. But since you're so determined, why don't you show us this information you claim to have? Who told you about stolen money on our property?" It was a clever move, challenging Taylor's authority, while attempting to identify the source of the leak. The sheriff hesitated momentarily, then waved dismissively. "That's confidential information, ma'am. Now stand aside or I'll have you arrested for obstruction." The standoff might have escalated further had fate not intervened in the form of a distant dust cloud approaching from the south. Riders, at least half a dozen, moving at a steady pace toward the Red Hawk Ranch. All eyes turned toward this new development. "Expecting company?" Taylor asked suspiciously. "No," Victoria answered truthfully, her expression concerned as she shaded her eyes against the morning sun. "Could be travelers looking for water or directions. Elena suggested, though her tone indicated she didn't believe it. Nathaniel stepped off the porch, studying the approaching riders with narrowed eyes. After a moment, his suspicion crystallized into certainty. "That's not random travelers," he said grimly. "Based on their riding formation and approach, I'd wager that's Colonel William Blackwood and his gang coming to retrieve their stolen payroll." Sheriff Taylor's demeanor changed instantly. The prospect of confronting 6 armed outlaws clearly hadn't been part of his plan for the day. "Blackwood, you're certain?" Nathaniel nodded. "I spent 2 years tracking that man across 5 territories. I know how he operates." They've likely realized their advance party isn't coming to the rendezvous point and decided to investigate. He turned to Taylor. "Sheriff, whatever quarrel you have with the Red Hawk sisters needs to wait. We've got 6 hardened killers approaching, and they won't take kindly to finding law enforcement here." For a moment, indecision warred on Taylor's gaunt face. Finally, self-preservation won out over his harassment of the sisters. "Johnson, Perkins." He barked to his deputies. "Get back to town. Bring reinforcements. Anyone who can handle a gun. Move fast." As the deputies galloped away, Taylor turned back to Nathaniel and the sisters. "This doesn't change anything about my suspicions, but I'm not fool enough to face Blackwood's gang with just the 3 of us." Victoria's expression was grim. "4," she corrected. "This is our home, Sheriff. We'll defend it." Elena nodded in agreement, checking her Winchester. Nathaniel quickly assessed their tactical situation. The ranch house was solidly built, with thick adobe walls that could stop bullets. The barn offered additional cover, and there was a windmill with a good vantage point over the approaching trail. But they were still outnumbered, and Blackwood's men were experienced killers. "We need to prepare," he said decisively. "Sheriff, I suggest you set up in the barn loft. Good view of the yard, and you'll be concealed until needed." To Nathaniel's mild surprise, Taylor nodded without argument. The immediate threat of Blackwood's gang had apparently trumped his animosity toward the Red Hawk sisters, at least temporarily. "I'll take the house," Victoria stated. "I can cover both the front door and the south-facing windows from there." Elena checked her ammunition. "I'll position myself behind the water trough. They'll have to cross the open yard to reach the house or barn." Nathaniel considered their options. "I'll take the windmill. Height advantage, and I can see them coming. We don't fire until they make a hostile move. They may not know we're aware of who they are or what they're carrying." He paused, looking at each of them in turn. "But make no mistake, if Blackwood realizes his money is here, he won't leave witnesses behind." The next 30 minutes passed in tense preparation. Nathaniel climbed to the windmill's small platform, using his spyglass to track Blackwood's approach. The gang was moving steadily but cautiously, spreading out as they neared the ranch, a clear indication they were anticipating potential trouble. Through the spyglass, Nathaniel could make out Blackwood himself, a stocky man with a distinctive white beard, riding a large black horse. The sight of him sent a surge of cold fury through Nathaniel's veins. After 6 long years of searching, the man who had helped murder his family was finally within rifle range. But personal vengeance would have to wait. Their immediate priority was surviving the confrontation and protecting the Red Hawk sisters. Blackwood and his men were now less than 500 yards away, close enough for Nathaniel to count 6 riders total, all heavily armed. William Blackwood and his gang entered the ranch yard with the casual confidence of men accustomed to intimidating others. They rode in a loose formation, spreading out to minimize vulnerability, guns visible but not yet drawn. Nathaniel observed from his perch on the windmill platform, rifle ready but out of sight. Blackwood reined his horse to a stop in the center of the yard, his cold eyes scanning the buildings. "Hello, the house," he called out, his voice carrying the cultured accent of an educated Southerner that had always seemed at odds with his brutal nature. "We're looking for two men who might have passed this way. Injured men. We're concerned about their welfare." The false concern in his tone was belied by the alertness of his posture and the way his right hand hovered near his holstered revolver. Victoria appeared in the doorway of the ranch house, her rifle held non-threateningly but visibly at her side. "No injured men here, sir," she replied evenly. "Just my sister and me." "We haven't had visitors in some time." Blackwood studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable beneath his wide-brimmed hat. "That's peculiar, miss. Our information suggests otherwise. Perhaps my men could water their horses while we discuss the matter further." It was a transparent attempt to gain access to the property, and Victoria clearly recognized it as such. "I'm afraid we're conserving water due to the recent dry spell," she responded smoothly. "There's a creek about 2 miles east that should serve your needs better." One of Blackwood's men, a scar-faced individual Nathaniel recognized as Sam Kirby, notorious for his knife work, leaned over to whisper something to Blackwood, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "Perhaps I haven't made myself clear, miss," Blackwood said, his tone hardening as he straightened in his saddle. "We're not asking permission. My men are going to search your property for our missing companions and their belongings. Any objection will be met with force." As he spoke, his men spread out further, hands moving to weapons. The standoff had reached its critical point. Nathaniel took careful aim at Blackwood, knowing that taking out the leader might disrupt the gang enough to give their small defensive force an advantage. But before he could squeeze the trigger, Sheriff Taylor made an impulsive move that changed everything. "This is Sheriff Marcus Taylor of Brimstone Creek," he shouted, emerging prematurely from the barn with his gun drawn. "You men are under arrest for the Tucson payroll robbery and multiple counts of murder." The next few seconds unfolded in a chaotic blur. Blackwood's men, startled by the sheriff's appearance, but reacting with the speed of experienced gunfighters, drew their weapons. Taylor fired first, his bullet striking one of the outlaws in the shoulder. Then the air erupted with gunfire. From his elevated position, Nathaniel saw Taylor take 2 bullets to the chest before he could get back to cover, falling in a heap near the barn door. Victoria was firing methodically from the house, while Elena, still concealed behind the water trough, began picking off Blackwood's men with remarkable accuracy. Nathaniel focused on Blackwood himself, but the colonel had already dismounted and taken cover behind a wagon, making him a difficult target. The initial exchange lasted less than a minute, leaving 2 of Blackwood's men dead in the yard and a third wounded but still firing. "Burn them out," Blackwood shouted to his remaining men. "Kirby, get to the back of the house. Mills, keep them pinned down." Nathaniel shifted his position, trying to get a clear shot at Blackwood, but the wily former officer kept himself well protected. Below, Nathaniel saw Kirby breaking for the rear of the house, where Victoria would be vulnerable. Making a split-second decision, Nathaniel abandoned his elevated position, climbing down the windmill's ladder as quickly as safety allowed. Once on the ground, he sprinted toward the house, using the scattered outbuildings for cover. A bullet splintered wood near his head as one of Blackwood's men spotted his movement. But Nathaniel pressed on, driven by the urgent need to reach the house before Kirby could outflank Victoria. Nathaniel reached the back of the ranch house just as Kirby was preparing to break through the kitchen door. The outlaw had his back turned, revolver in one hand and a burning torch in the other, clearly intending to set fire to the structure. "Drop it, Kirby," Nathaniel commanded, his Colt leveled at the man's back. Kirby froze momentarily, then spun around with surprising speed, firing wildly. Nathaniel felt the hot kiss of a bullet grazing his left arm. But his own shot was more accurate, striking Kirby's center mass. The outlaw staggered backward, dropping both gun and torch, his face registering shock before he collapsed. Nathaniel kicked the still-burning torch away from the house, then quickly checked the fallen man to ensure he was no longer a threat. Kirby's lifeless eyes stared at the clear blue sky, his expression forever fixed in that final moment of surprise. The gunfire had momentarily abated, suggesting a tactical regrouping by both sides. Nathaniel slipped through the back door into the kitchen, finding Victoria reloading her rifle. "Taylor's down," he informed her tersely. "Probably dead. Kirby won't be a problem anymore, but Blackwood and at least 2 of his men are still out there." Victoria nodded grimly, her face streaked with sweat and powder residue. "Elena?" Nathaniel had lost sight of the younger sister during his rush to the house. "Still at her position, last I saw," he answered, moving to a window to assess the situation outside. Blackwood will be getting desperate. With half his gang down and reinforcements potentially on the way from town, he'll either retreat or make a final, reckless push to get what he came for. As if in answer to Nathaniel's prediction, a renewed barrage of gunfire erupted from the yard, concentrated on Elena's position behind the water trough. The intensity of the fusillade suggested Blackwood was trying to either kill her or force her to abandon her tactically advantageous spot. "We need to draw their fire away from Elena," Victoria said urgently, moving toward the front of the house. Nathaniel followed, his mind racing through options. "I'll circle around through the root cellar," he decided. "The entrance is concealed enough that I might be able to approach from an unexpected direction." Victoria gave him a sharp nod. "I'll provide covering fire from the front windows. Be careful, Mr. Hayes. Blackwood didn't survive this long by being careless." Nathaniel checked his ammunition. 4 rounds left in his Colt, plus a spare cylinder preloaded in his pocket. "Neither did I, Miss Redhawk." The root cellar door was located on the eastern side of the house, partially hidden by a small shed. Nathaniel slipped out a side window and made his way to it, keeping low and using available cover. The sounds of gunfire continued sporadically from the front of the property, suggesting Victoria was successfully diverting attention from his movements. The cellar entrance was a slanted wooden door set into the ground, which Nathaniel eased open just enough to slip through before closing it behind him. The earthen tunnel led toward the barn area, emerging behind a stack of crates that provided excellent concealment. From this vantage point, he could see Blackwood and 1 remaining henchman using the wagon as cover while firing at both the house and Elena's position. Of the sheriff, there was no sign, confirming Nathaniel's suspicion that Taylor had not survived his rash confrontation with the outlaws. Nathaniel took careful aim at Blackwood's exposed shoulder and fired. The bullet found its mark, causing the outlaw leader to howl in pain and drop momentarily out of sight behind the wagon. His companion turned toward the source of the shot, giving Elena the opening she needed. Her Winchester cracked sharply, and the outlaw jerked backward, dropping his weapon before crumpling to the ground. For a moment, silence fell over the ranch yard, broken only by the distant whinny of a frightened horse. Then Blackwood's voice called out, strained but still commanding. "Hayes, I know it's you out there. This isn't over." Nathaniel remained silent, changing position slightly to maintain his tactical advantage. He could see that Blackwood was wounded, but still dangerous, like a cornered mountain lion. "You've been chasing me for years, Hayes," Blackwood continued, clearly trying to draw Nathaniel into revealing his position. "All because of your wife and boy? They were just casualties of war, man. Nothing personal." The taunting words stoked the ember of rage that had burned in Nathaniel's chest for 6 long years, but he controlled it, refusing to be baited into a reckless move. Instead, he circled silently toward the wagon, keeping to cover. Blackwood was alone now, his gang eliminated. The odds had shifted dramatically in Nathaniel's favor, but underestimating William Blackwood had cost many men their lives over the years. "I have unfinished business with the Red Hawk women anyway," Blackwood called out, his voice taking on a sinister tone. "Did they tell you about their father, Colonel James Marston, my former commanding officer?" The unexpected revelation gave Nathaniel pause. He glanced toward the house, where Victoria had appeared in the doorway, her rifle trained on Blackwood's position. Her expression confirmed Blackwood's claim. There was recognition there, and something deeper. Hatred, perhaps, or fear. "Marston went native," Blackwood continued, clearly sensing he had struck a nerve. "Deserted his post, took up with an Apache woman, betrayed his country, his race. I tracked him down years ago, made him pay for his treachery. These girls are all that's left of his disgrace." Victoria's face had gone rigid, her knuckles white where she gripped her rifle. Elena had emerged from behind the water trough, her young features contorted with fury as she advanced toward Blackwood's position, heedless of the danger. "You murdered our father," she called out, her voice raw with emotion. "Ambushed him and left him to die slowly." Nathaniel realized that the situation was rapidly spiraling out of control. Elena was exposing herself to Blackwood's fire, driven by a personal vendetta that mirrored his own. Victoria seemed momentarily paralyzed by the revelation of her father's killer. Blackwood would exploit this emotional chaos if given the chance. Moving decisively, Nathaniel broke from cover and advanced on the wagon from the opposite direction of Elena's approach. "It's over, Blackwood," he called out, drawing the outlaw leader's attention. "Your men are dead. You're wounded. There's no escape." Blackwood rose partially from behind the wagon, his revolver tracking toward Elena. "Maybe so, Hayes, but I can still settle old scores before I go." Nathaniel fired simultaneously with Victoria, their bullets striking Blackwood from different angles. The outlaw staggered, fired a wild shot that went wide, then collapsed against the wagon wheel, his revolver falling from nerveless fingers. The aftermath of the gunfight found Nathaniel, Victoria, and Elena standing over Blackwood's body, the desert sun beating down mercilessly on the blood-soaked earth of the ranch yard. 4 outlaws lay dead, including William Blackwood, while Sheriff Taylor's body sprawled near the barn entrance. "Is it true?" Nathaniel asked quietly. "Was he the one who killed your father?" Victoria nodded, her expression a complex mixture of grief and vindication. "5 years ago, we were away trading horses when it happened. By the time we returned, Father was barely alive. He told us Blackwood had led the attack, revenge for Father's desertion and his marriage to our mother." Elena knelt beside Blackwood's body, her youthful face solemn as she studied the man who had orphaned her. "We've been waiting for him to resurface all this time. When his men arrived with the stolen payroll, we saw an opportunity." "You used me as bait," Nathaniel said, the realization dawning on him. Not accusatory, simply stating a fact. Victoria met his gaze steadily. "We used each other, Mr. Hayes. You wanted Blackwood for what he did to your family. We wanted him for what he did to ours. Justice has been served for all of us today." There was truth in her words, Nathaniel had to admit. The Red Hawk sisters had manipulated events to bring Blackwood within their reach, but he couldn't deny that their goals had aligned perfectly with his own. And in the end, they had fought bravely, risking everything to confront their father's murderer. "The army will want their money back," he noted, changing the subject. Victoria nodded. "Of course, we never intended to keep it. That was merely the lure to bring Blackwood to us." The sound of approaching riders interrupted their conversation, the reinforcements from Brimstone Creek, arriving too late to participate in the battle, but in time to witness its aftermath. "We should get our story straight," Nathaniel said quietly. "Sheriff Taylor died attempting to apprehend wanted criminals. We defended ourselves against Blackwood's gang when they attacked the ranch. Simple, clean." Victoria considered this, then nodded. "The trunk is still hidden in the hayloft. We'll turn it over to the proper authorities. As for the rest," she glanced at her sister, who had risen from beside Blackwood's body, her expression now composed. "We're agreed, Mr. Hayes. What happened here today was justice, not vengeance. At least, that's what we'll tell ourselves in the dark nights to come." As the riders from town approached, Nathaniel found himself studying the Red Hawk sisters with newfound respect. They had weathered a storm of violence with courage and determination, facing down not only Blackwood's gang, but also the prejudice and suspicion that had dogged them all their lives. In Victoria's proud bearing and Elena's fierce resilience, he recognized kindred spirits, survivors who had been forged in the crucible of frontier hardship and personal tragedy. "What will you do now?" he asked them, genuinely curious. Victoria's gaze swept over their small ranch, taking in the bullet-riddled buildings and blood-stained yard. "Rebuild, continue. This is our home, Mr. Hayes, the only one we have." Elena nodded in agreement, adding, "And perhaps find some peace, now that Father's killer has faced justice." 3 days later, Nathaniel Hayes sat on the porch of the Red Hawk Ranch, watching the sunset paint the desert landscape in shades of gold and crimson. The army had retrieved their stolen payroll, the bodies had been buried, and the initial furor over the gunfight had begun to subside. Sheriff Taylor's deputy had been appointed the new sheriff of Brimstone Creek, a young man who seemed less inclined to harass the Red Hawk sisters than his predecessor had been. Victoria emerged from the house, carrying 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to Nathaniel before settling into the chair beside him. "Your horse is saddled and provisioned," she said quietly. "Elena packed enough supplies to see you to the next town." Nathaniel nodded his thanks, sipping the strong brew. "It's time I moved on. With Blackwood gone, my business here is concluded." Victoria studied his profile in the fading light. "And what will you do now, Mr. Hayes? Your quest for vengeance is complete. The men who killed your family have all paid their debt." It was a question Nathaniel had been asking himself since Blackwood fell. For 6 years, revenge had been his driving purpose, the force that propelled him through each day. Now that it was fulfilled, he felt strangely hollow, uncertain of his path forward. "I don't rightly know," he admitted. "Perhaps head north, find work as a scout or rancher. Or maybe west to California. I've heard there's good land there for a man willing to work it." Victoria nodded, her expression thoughtful. "New beginnings can be found in many places for those with the courage to seek them out." They sat in companionable silence as the last light faded from the sky and the first stars appeared. In the distance, a coyote howled, the sound echoing across the vast emptiness of the desert. "You could stay," Victoria said finally, her voice so soft that Nathaniel almost didn't hear her. "Not forever, just for a while. We could use help rebuilding the barn, and winter will be here before long." The offer surprised him, though perhaps it shouldn't have. There was an undeniable connection between them, a shared understanding born of similar losses and hardships. "I'm not much for peeling down roots these days," he replied carefully. "Haven't been, since Sarah and Thomas died." Victoria's gaze remained fixed on the darkening horizon. "I'm not offering roots, Mr. Hayes. Just a place to rest before you continue your journey. And perhaps some companionship along the way." The proposition hung in the air between them, weighted with unspoken possibilities. Nathaniel considered it, finding the idea unexpectedly appealing. The Red Hawk sisters were strong, capable women who had carved out their place in a harsh and unforgiving land. They asked for no protection, no commitment beyond mutual respect and shared labor. And there was something about Victoria, her quiet dignity, her resilience, the depths behind her dark eyes, that resonated with him in ways he hadn't experienced in years. "I suppose the barn does need rebuilding," he said finally, a hint of warmth creeping into his typically stoic tone. Victoria smiled then, a rare and transformative expression that softened the hardness life had etched into her features. "Indeed it does, Mr. Hayes. Indeed it does." As night fully claimed the sky, they remained on the porch, two survivors finding momentary peace in each other's company. Nathaniel knew that the ghosts of the past would never fully release their hold, not for him, not for Victoria and Elena. But perhaps, in this remote corner of the frontier, there was room for something new to grow alongside the memories of what had been lost. Not redemption exactly, but a kind of continuance. The desert stretched out before them, vast and unchanging, yet somehow full of possibility. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but for tonight, this was enough. The horizon remained open, the future unwritten. And in a land where second chances were as rare as rainfall, Nathaniel Hayes found himself willing, at last, to accept the one being offered. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left.